The rope tightened, and for one terrible second, the room waited to see if her neck would snap or if she would blink first. "Who sent you?" He twisted the rope around her throat and made the deadliest men in the room hold their breath. Welcome back to Silent Heroes. This is the channel that never lets heroes fade into silence. This is where the fighters who bled without applause, who stood watch while the world slept, are remembered. Here, their stories do not die in classified files or whispered regrets. They live. And tonight, you are about to hear one that was never meant to leave the shadows. The Tactical Operations Center at Outpost Redvale squatted against the Afghani mountains like a scar that refused to heal. Concrete walls reinforced with steel mesh trapped the cold night air inside, mixing it with a smell of sweat, gun oil, and burned coffee. Maps were taped and retaped to the walls, corners curling, grease pencil markings bleeding into each other like unfinished thoughts. Screens flickered with drone feeds and satellite imagery that showed too much and explained too little. Outside, the wind carried distant gunfire like a reminder that peace here was always temporary. Inside, 12 men waited, and none of them were known for mercy. She was tied to a steel chair at the center of the room. Her wrists were bound tight enough to turn her fingers numb, raw skin scraped open where the restraints had shifted. A white duty shirt clung to her back, soaked dark with sweat, the fabric trembling with each controlled breath. Her boots rested flat on the concrete, planted like roots refusing to be torn free. Her face was pale, jaw set, eyes lifted, not in fear, but calculation. That was the first thing they failed to understand. The man holding the rope leaned close enough that she could smell the metal on his breath. Chief Warrant Officer Marcus Hale, 22 years of combat experience etched into his posture, pulled the cord tighter with a sharp jerk. "You don't belong here," he snarled. His voice cut through the room like a blade meant to humiliate as much as hurt. "You think this is a game? You think because you're a woman we'll hesitate?" The room felt smaller as his words landed, heavy with contempt and certainty. "We've buried people for less than what you're trying." The rope pulled tighter, a final warning wrapped in paracord. Still, she said nothing. Sweat ran down her temple, tracing a path along her cheek. Her hands clenched once, then relaxed, conserving energy. She tilted her head a fraction, just enough to ease the pressure for a heartbeat. That movement didn't look like panic. It looked practiced. One of the men near the wall frowned, eyes narrowing. Something about this wasn't adding up. Her gaze shifted, just once, to the man by the biometric terminal. Staff Sergeant Daniel Mercer, veteran of too many nights like this, felt a chill crawl up his spine. He had seen that look before, not in enemies, not in prisoners, in instructors. The ones who broke you down completely that fear stopped working. Mercer studied her wrists, the angle of her elbows, the tension in her neck. Then he saw it. A small mark near her left wrist, half hidden beneath the restraint and the blood. Ink, faded, 3 letters. His stomach dropped. Memory hit him like a body blow. A training hall, a mat, a voice correcting his stance as she flipped him onto his back, again. Hale noticed the hesitation and barked, "What are you staring at?" Mercer swallowed, heartbeat pounding in his ears. The rope was still tight. Her face was starting to darken at the edges, and suddenly the room felt like it was standing on the edge of something irreversible. A mistake already made, still unfolding. A silence that felt like the deep breath before disaster.
The room was silent, save for the rasp of her breathing and the faint hum of the tactical monitors. Every eye in the TOC had shifted toward the small tattoo on her wrist, the inked letters barely legible under the rope burns. Staff Sergeant Mercer's mind raced back 5 years. 5 years to a cold winter morning in Fort Ashford, where sweat, shouts, and the smell of rubber mats had been his only world. He remembered the instructor who had pushed him past exhaustion, past fear, past the point where surrender had ever seemed an option. That instructor had been relentless, precise, and utterly unyielding, every motion corrected, every failure dissected, every victory earned, not handed. And she had left a mark on every one of them, a mark not just of skill, but of something deeper, discipline, respect, a code that few men lived up to. Mercer's pulse quickened. Could it be her? Could this woman, bound and bleeding, be the same one who had taught him the meaning of combat? Her father had been a legend in his own right, a refugee who had crossed continents, survived every hardship the world could throw, and transformed those lessons into steel-hard principles for raising warriors. From a garage in a suburban backyard, she had learned leverage, timing, and the unspoken truth that smaller opponents could dominate larger ones through skill and will. Every morning she had grappled with her father. Every evening she had studied. Every night she had imagined a world where she would train others, not just to fight, but to survive. By 16, she could subdue opponents twice her size. By 18, she had mastered multiple disciplines, earning black belts, national titles, and the kind of respect that wasn't given, it was earned, through pain, persistence, and perfection. Yet here she was, restrained in the middle of a base halfway across the world, treated as an intruder, a threat. Her name echoed in Mercer's memory, Evelyn Cross. She wasn't just a soldier, she was a maker of soldiers, a mother to men who had called her that in halls and dojos, on mats and ranges. The men surrounding her, the elite operators, had been unaware of the invisible chains linking them to her teachings. She had trained half of them, unknowingly shaping the very people now ready to judge her. Mercer's mind flickered to the first lesson. Control your fear, control your movements, control the room. She had taught him to see the opening in every attack, to exploit hesitation, to trust in calculated strength. Hale tightened his grip again. "Answer me," he shouted, voice cracking, rage bubbling like molten metal. Her eyes didn't waver. Instead, she tilted her head subtly, a gesture Mercer instantly recognized, the same subtle body language she had used to correct his grip 5 years ago. Hale's confidence faltered just slightly. Something about her presence unsettled him, though he could not name it. Memory surged forward in Mercer's mind, the way she had thrown him onto the mat 6 times in one session, the corrections so precise he could not resist obeying, the respect she demanded, not through fear, but through absolute mastery of craft. "She trained us," Mercer whispered under his breath. The words trembled with disbelief. The operators around him remained oblivious, yet the tension coiled like a spring in the air. Something was unraveling, something Hale could not predict. Cross's father had been killed in a war he believed in, protecting his men until his last breath. She had witnessed the cost of unpreparedness firsthand, vowed never to let another soldier die because of it. The grief had been a crucible, shaping her into someone who carried responsibility like armor, who taught through love as fiercely as through discipline. Hale, still blind to her history, underestimated the weight behind every measured breath, every controlled blink. Mercer watched Hale's knuckles whiten against the rope. He remembered the first day he realized her power was more than physical. It was psychological, moral, absolute. And then a subtle click, a memory triggered. The way she had paused, rotated her shoulders slightly, adjusted her angle, a motion so small yet deliberate. Hale, oblivious, yanked the rope tighter. Her eyes flickered toward the biometric console. Another subtle motion, another trigger. Mercer recognized the signature of someone who had mastered every scenario, anticipated every action, and already controlled outcomes that had not yet occurred. The room seemed to tilt, the air thickening with realization. "You've trained half of them," Mercer finally muttered aloud, voice trembling, disbelief catching in his throat. Hale's glare snapped to Mercer, fury ignited. "What are you talking about?" Mercer shook his head, words barely forming. "The mat, the dojo, combat instructors. She taught me, taught all of us, men in this room." Hale's jaw tightened. The certainty that had guided him for decades wavered for a heartbeat. A ripple of doubt passed through his rigid posture. Cross's breathing remained slow, deliberate, controlled, every exhale a demonstration of mastery, a silent lecture on patience, authority, and focus. The rope dug against her skin, a tangible threat, yet she did not falter. A younger operator, standing near the tactical console, noticed her hands resting lightly on the chair arms, fingertips tracing the edges almost imperceptibly, a subtle signal, something learned in training, not born of instinct. Mercer's mind raced through names, faces, accomplishments, each recollection more impossible than the last. She had been everywhere, teaching, shaping, influencing outcomes that no one had noticed until now, and as Hale demanded, shouting with growing frustration, Cross's eyes met Mercer's again, calm, steady, almost mocking in their patience. It was the calm before the storm, the quiet that prelude to upheaval. She had been underestimated, dismissed, restrained, but the web of her influence stretched far beyond what any man in the room could see. Mercer's stomach twisted as he realized the depth of it. She wasn't just an officer, she was the architect of the skills these operators relied on to survive, to dominate, to endure. Hale, still gripping the rope, did not notice the tremor in his own certainty, the first fracture in a foundation he had built over decades. And then, without warning, a distant rumble shook the base. The walls vibrated, the monitors flickered, the tactical radios spatted static and fragmented voices. Her eyes narrowed, a flash of instinct honed over a lifetime, sharpened in dojo, in field, in loss, and in grief. The moment that should have been her end was about to become the spark that would redefine the entire operation. Mercer's heart pounded in time with hers. Every memory, every lesson, every secret she carried now converged in this instant, and the air was thick with the promise of an explosion, one that would shatter assumptions, roles, and expectations, forever. The ground shook violently as the first mortar round slammed into the perimeter, sending dust and shrapnel flying like deadly confetti. "Get down! Get down!" the operators shouted, diving for cover, their rifles snapping into action as chaos erupted. Major Evelyn Cross rolled from the debris, her body instinctively low, rifle in hand, eyes scanning every shadow, every movement. The rope burns on her wrists throbbed, the bruise across her neck a reminder of what had happened minutes ago, but she did not falter. This was no longer interrogation, no longer suspicion. This was combat, pure, unfiltered, life-or-death chaos. She barked orders with the authority of someone who had molded the very men now looking to her for guidance. "Mercer, 2 men northwest, cover fire. Hale, eastern sector, hold your line, move." The operators hesitated, confusion etched on their faces, but her voice cut through the fear. She was no longer the woman restrained and judged. She was a force, and they had no choice but to follow. Bullets ripped past concrete barriers, metal screeched, and explosions shook the base like a war drum, calling the living to action. Cross moved fluidly, weaving through the chaos, her eyes constantly calculating angles, threat levels, escape routes, and countermeasures. Every step, every motion, a masterclass in survival and leadership. Men she had unknowingly trained followed her lead without question. She reached the northern defensive post, where 3 soldiers were pinned behind shattered sandbags. The youngest, Sergeant Hayes, had a deep wound in his leg. Blood pooled beneath him. Fear glinted in his eyes. Cross didn't hesitate. She tore off her field scarf, pressed it against the wound, speaking softly yet firmly. "Hold still. Breathe. You will live. Trust me." Her hands moved with precision, knowledge honed through years of teaching and personal loss. Even Hale, still recovering from disbelief, found himself following her directions, kneeling beside her to secure the wounded man's injuries. The counterattack was orchestrated like a symphony. Cross called out coordinates, targets, suppression fire. Operators she had once taught in gyms and mats, now fully aware of her mastery, moved with her rhythm, executing every maneuver flawlessly. The enemy had expected chaos to break the defenders. They had expected hesitation. They had not expected unity, precision, and ruthlessness from a woman they had dismissed minutes ago. Hale barked orders, his voice trembling, trying to assert authority, but Cross corrected him, calmly, decisively. "Your sector. Hold steady. I've got the northern wire. Coordinate. Don't move until I signal." Every operator obeyed, even those who had doubted her mere moments ago. Mercer covered a flank, executing a maneuver he had learned under her guidance 5 years ago, unconsciously, instinctively. Cross noticed the slight delay, adjusted the formation, whispered corrections into radios, small gestures that saved lives. 7 enemy fighters lay incapacitated within the first 3 minutes. Another 3 dragged their wounded back in retreat. The base shuddered under continued fire, but the defenders moved with a rhythm that only her presence could produce. Hale's fury transformed into awe, then into something heavier: guilt, disbelief, reverence. Cross's eyes caught his for a brief instant, a silent demand for accountability, a quiet challenge to acknowledge the truth. The firefight raged on, bullets snapping past her head, debris bouncing against her boots, and still she commanded, still she led. A young medic, Specialist Ray, lay pinned with a chest wound, gasping. Cross dashed across open ground, ignoring gunfire, reaching him in seconds. She applied a tourniquet, stabilized him, her voice sharp, calm, resolute. "Breathe. Stay with me. I need you alive. Focus on my voice, not the fire." Hale moved to assist, fumbling with attention, and Cross corrected him with precision, her patience unmatched. "Pressure here, not there. Hold still. Count with me." 2 operators who had mocked her minutes ago now followed her instructions without hesitation, the realization of her authority sinking in too late to deny. Her control was absolute. Every life saved, every maneuver executed, a testament to her mastery, both learned and inherited. The attacks surged, the enemy pushing hard, but the defenders adapted, shifted, and countered with lethal efficiency. Cross moved like a ghost through the battlefield, calling out movements, adjusting fire, patching wounds, her presence the axis around which the chaos rotated. Mercer followed her lead, the old memories now alive, proving the depth of her influence. Hale's hands trembled as he fired, glanced at the chaos, then at her. Respect had replaced contempt. Reverence replaced doubt. And then the first mortar hit the central compound directly. The blast threw debris, dust, and the scent of burnt fuel into the air. Cross was thrown to the ground, grit in her teeth, arms skimming glass and concrete. She rose immediately, commanding, calculating, alive. The soldiers followed, and the enemy faltered, confused by the precision, the coordination, the sudden, impossible leadership of the woman they had underestimated. The firefight began to subside as the quick reaction force arrived, helicopters descending, additional operators securing the perimeter. Cross surveyed the aftermath, the wounded, the shaken, the exhausted. Lives had been saved because she had dared to act decisively when others hesitated. Hale stood nearby, face pale, knuckles white, the weight of his misjudgment pressing down like armor too heavy to lift. Cross approached him slowly, voice soft but carrying the authority of survival. "You acted from fear. You judged. You failed to see. But it doesn't end here. Learn. Lead differently. There's no shame in correction." Hale's eyes filled with tears, a mixture of grief and relief, as he understood the lesson he had resisted: acknowledgement, accountability, and the quiet power of forgiveness. Mercer, Ray, and the other operators looked on, respect absolute, voices hushed, knowing they had witnessed a leader forged in fire, in grief, and in relentless dedication. Cross finally moved to a quiet corner, removing her blood-stained gloves, closing her eyes for a moment. The night was silent now, punctuated by distant heliblades, the final echoes of gunfire fading into the Afghan mountains. Her chest heaved, but there was no panic, only the profound calm of someone who had led, protected, and survived. Hale approached her, voice soft, barely above the wind. I'm sorry." Cross nodded, a faint smile touching her lips, not triumphant, not bitter, but serene, almost tender. "It's not about you. It's about the people you lead, the lives you protect. That's what matters." The operators gathered, exchanging glances, newly aware of the power of humility, training, and courage beyond expectation. The base stood, lives had been saved, authority had shifted, respect had been earned. Cross glanced toward the horizon, sun rising, painting the mountains gold and orange. She turned to her soldiers, voice soft, carrying the weight of history and hope. Check your men, treat the wounded, learn from what just happened, and remember, what we do matters. Every life, every choice. The operators nodded silently. Words were no need. The lesson was etched into memory. As they began securing the compound, a quiet peace settled, heavy yet comforting, the kind of quiet that follows storms and chaos alike. Cross stood alone for a heartbeat, fingers tracing the faint tattoo on her wrist, a promise kept, a legacy honored, a vow fulfilled. And then, slowly, she walked toward the rising sun, leaving a mark that would last in memory, not in headlines.